The fitness industry is obsessed with losing weight. This is no secret to anybody. Go into any gym on social media, you will find endless people telling you how to lose weight and why it is so important. But outside of bodybuilding and powerlifting and really serious athlete circles, you're not going to find enough information about bulking and gaining weight. And I think this leads us to not being able to do it properly and not understanding why it is so important for us to take time to gain muscle and actually bulk and to bulk properly, to understand how to do it so that we gain the muscle that we want without putting on too much excess fat or consuming too many calories in general that then become detrimental to our health. Again, we are so focused on weight loss, and I think it also leads people to being scared to even eat more or gain weight, see the scale go up. But as I've talked about over and over and over again on this podcast, go back and listen to any number of episodes where I talk about why muscle mass is so important. That is why I want to focus today on how to build muscle mass and be intentional about the bulking process so that we can maximize that muscle gain, get the most out of it, and do it in the healthiest way possible. That is what we're going to cover today on the Lifting Cues podcast, the podcast for lifters. I'm your host, Coach Quinn, aka Coach Q. I am an online and in-person fitness coach who specializes in training and nutrition plans for building strength and muscle. I've been a lifter myself for over half of my life, and now in my 30s, I'm on the journey to becoming a competitive power lifter. And I'm going to take all of my personal experience as well as the real world experience helping real people get real results to give you the best lifting cues possible to reach your goals. And if your goal is building muscle, it is going to at some point take a bulk. So that is what we are going to cover today. That is today's lifting cue. And I am going to try and cover everything about bulking so that you can understand exactly how to do it, when to do it, and again, how to do it properly so that we don't put on too much fat and we're able to gain the muscle that we want. If we just eat as many calories as possible and train really hard, sure, we will gain muscle, but that will lead us to putting on excess fat, which we know is not good for our health. It is not good for our mental or emotional health as well. So we want to try to mitigate that process. And eating as much as humanly possible for an extended period of time is not going to be enjoyable, and it's probably going to lead you to eating more processed foods. It is hard to eat in a very high surplus with just whole foods that are very nutritious, high in fiber, lean proteins. So we have to find certain ways to control those calories. We cannot just eat whatever we want, whenever we want, when we're on a bulk. This is commonly referred to as the dirty bulk. And it is, or, the dreamer bulk is another way to put it because it sounds great. I just get to eat whatever I want, lift really hard. Don't worry about how much weight you're gaining. It's mostly muscle. We just assume this. I think it's to tell yourself mentally that you're gaining muscle so that as you see fat come on, it's not as big of a deal. And as you see the scale go up, it is not as big of a deal. But we do not want to do it this way. We want to do it sustainably and in the healthiest way possible so that we can get the results that we want, but also, avoid the negative parts of gaining weight for our health and for our mental health as well. I want to start first by defining bulking and explaining why it is actually relevant to set an intentional bulk and take time to actually bulk up your body. So when you first start working out and you're relatively untrained, probably have a little bit of excess body fat, you're under muscled, we can do what's called body recomposition. Because your body has excess energy in the form of fat to take from, you can actually eat in a calorie deficit, a moderate to low calorie deficit. And as you start to strength train, you will recomp your body, which is building muscle and losing fat at a pretty much the same time. Now, fat will probably come off at a faster rate, but you will also be able to build muscle relatively quickly because you are giving it a training stimulus that it has not seen before. And as you start to eat more protein, you eat a little bit healthier, give your body the fuel that it needs, you can make significant muscle gains early on in this process. These are called the newbie gains. But eventually, we will reach a point where energy is too low. We've lost some fat. We are eating in an energy deficit. And now, if we want to continue to build muscle, build more muscle, continue to gain strength in the gym, we need to give our bodies more fuel. Mass is not created from nothing. If we want to be able to build muscle, and again, if we need to understand why this is so important, please go back and listen to previous podcasts as to why it is so important to build strength and muscle. But if we want to do this, we have to give our bodies the energy necessary to do so. And if you want to increase the mass on your body, you want to create new mass, we have to give our bodies more energy than it would burn so that we are able to create that mass. Now, again, we want to be able to create muscle and not just put on fat. That is why I am not going to recommend dirty bulking, and I am going to lay out this process so that we can bulk properly. But if we are not thinking about, okay, I need to eat more food, and wrap your head around the fact that you want to put on weight so that you can put on muscle, this is never going to work. We are never going to reach the point where we actually can build muscle. Muscle building takes a significant amount of time. Like I said, after that newbie phase of 1 to maybe 2 years, it is going to get significantly more difficult to put on muscle as you continue to become more and more advanced in the gym. You can continue to find ways in your training to increase the intensity, increase the tension on your muscles over time as you continue to get more advanced. That will help you. Again, this is all going to come into how we bulk and how we do it properly. But I want to lay that groundwork of understanding why this is so important, because that muscle growth process is going to slow, and we want to keep it going so that we can build as much muscle as possible, so that as we age, we continue to maintain as much of that muscle as possible. Now, this is not to say that you cannot gain muscle as you age, or that as you age, one day muscle is just going to fall off a cliff. But we know, starting at the age of 30, we lose muscle mass at a rate of 3 to 8% per decade. And that rate of decline increases exponentially when we hit the age of 60. So as we age, we have to be more and more intentional. And as we become more and more advanced in our training, we have to be more intentional about building muscle. We need to take the time to do it. So, with that, how do we bulk properly? What is the biggest mistake we see when people go into a bulk? I'm going to save how many calories people think they need to eat for a later time, because I think it kind of ties in with my entire theory of bulking and how we should do it. But the biggest mistake I see people make with bulking is the time frame. The time frame that people want to bulk and that they plan to bulk is just much too short. We take way too little time. So you go through, 12 to 16 week diet phases, and we think that bulks should take the same amount of time. Okay, I'm going to bulk for the next 3 months, then I'm going to go back into a cut. I don't believe that this is enough time, especially not to do it in the sustainable manner that we want to. 3 months is just not enough time to build muscle. I am going to set a bulk at a minimum of 16 weeks, a minimum of 16 weeks. I would rather see you do it for 6 to 8 months. Now, I know this probably doesn't fit with people's schedule. If you are a strength athlete or a bodybuilder, maybe you don't have that much time in between, performances. or meats, whatever it might be. But I think you should actually take that time if you are serious about it, especially if you are one of these strength athletes. Take the time because you have probably reached an advanced stage in your training. If you're a strength athlete, the only thing really left for you to do is to build more muscle to get stronger because you've built the motor skills, the neurological connections. You know how to complete the lifts efficiently. You know how to move. So you've developed that piece of strength. Now, the last one is just force production. How do we produce more force? We get bigger muscles and more contractile tissue. So it is worth you putting in the time to actually bulk and bulk properly. So take that time to do it, especially if you're a bodybuilder. If you're too small, take a lot of time in between shows. If you are just a general human being who wants to look good and feel better and be stronger, we also should take this time to be able to bulk properly and be able to put on the muscle that is going to give us the look that we want. And we should be intentional about it. What I will tell you is taking off fat is a much faster process than putting on muscle. So we need to be more intentional, put more time into it. And then once we build a significant amount of muscle, we can cut the fat off and we will have developed the habits and the sustainability needed and the understanding of nutrition to be able to do that with more relative ease. So give yourself the time to actually bulk and bulk properly. So once we've set kind of our time frame. So set your bulk time frame in a period of time where you're not gonna be as seen. So I like to bulk more in the fall and the winter for most people. Again, if you're a competitor, put it in between shows, in between meets, whatever that might look like, whatever period of time you have, make it in between those times so that you can do it properly. But if you're a general population person who just wants to look better and feel better about themselves, set your bulk for a time when you're not going to have to take your shirt off, when it is not the summertime, when you're not going on vacation, when you just really don't care about, if you've reached the point where you're like, you know what, I'm good. I don't really care how people see me. I'm going to take the time to bulk no matter what. Okay, great. So that's how we're going to choose when we decide to bulk. It really just depends on you, your lifestyle, and where you're at mentally and emotionally, and where you're at training wise. Because again, as you advance in your training, we're going to need to take more time and be more intentional about our bulks. So it is going to be a longer time frame, but lay that out and understand that we need to commit to this process. And part of committing to the process is getting comfortable with the scale going up, with our calories going up, with eating more food, and with putting on some body fat. Because we are not going to just gain muscle in perpetuity. No matter how smartly and slowly we do this bulk, there will come fat with the muscle that we put on. We can't just put on muscle and that be the only thing. If it was, we'd all be jacked and huge, but it just doesn't work out that way. So you need to get comfortable with seeing yourself with more body fat, understanding that there will come some body fat that you will see on your body, that the scale is going to go up, and that your calories need to go up. Like I said earlier in this podcast, we are so conditioned in our society to want to lose weight and to think we have to lose weight and we have to continue to do this, that we are terrified to eat more food and see the scale go up. I see this. I'm going to pick on you ladies right now. So, any of the ladies listen to this podcast, I'm going to pick on you guys right now. I see too many women come into the gym or looking for coaching that are obsessed with the scale going down, even though by no metrics are they overweight or anything like that. And they all tell me to a T that they want to be toned. And we know that being toned requires us to build muscle, but they are terrified to actually build muscle. And this isn't just for the ladies out there. There are plenty of quote unquote skinny fat guys that you would look at and say, oh, he's not overweight, but he doesn't really have any muscle mass. That person is thinking the same exact way. So it goes for both men and women. We are conditioned to just see the scale go down. No matter what we look like, no matter what our muscle mass is, if it is not being measured and tracked, we are just in this thought process of if the scale's not going down, I'm doing bad. That is not necessarily the case. So, if we want to build muscle, if we want to look better, be healthier, um, actually get the body that we want, that toned or athletic look for you guys out there that tell me you want to look athletic, guess what? Those guys are all jacked. They all have a bunch of muscle mass. So, we need to build muscle. We need to take some time and some intentionality to actually do that. So get comfortable with the fact that the scale is going to go up and your body weight is going to go up no matter what. But I am going to teach you how to do this in a more sustainable manner, in a healthier way, so that it doesn't have to go up quite as much. And you can understand how to know if you're building muscle and if most of the weight that you are gaining, if you see the scale going up, is muscle. So, with that, we need to commit to the process. I laid out the timeline is pretty long and that we need to get comfortable with us gaining weight, eating more calories than you probably think. This is another one. I'm going to go on a side tangent here real quick with calories. A lot of people have no idea, one, how many calories they're eating, two, how many calories they actually can eat, and therefore how many calories they're actually overeating currently. When I calculate people's maintenance calories, they are absolutely floored by the amount because 9 times out of 10, depending on how old you are and how tall you are, your maintenance calories are probably over 2,000. Yes, ladies, that goes for you as well. They are over 2,000 calories. And you say, oh my God, there's no way I can eat that much. I guarantee you, if you actually track it properly, it is way less than you think. Eating 2,000 calories in America is not hard at all. You can do it without even really thinking about it. So I just want to kind of lay that out for us now so that we understand that we are going to have to eat more and be very comfortable with that. And that is part of committing to this process. So, what I mean when I say committing to the process, we understand that it's going to take an extended period of time. But I think what happens is with point number one of being terrified to put on body fat or see the scale go up, we start to eat more and do all of the other things that we set out to do when we want to bulk. And then, 3 to 4 weeks in, we step on the scale and you see it's gone up X number of pounds. Or you look at yourself in the mirror and say, I look a little fluffier than I would like. I'll use that word, fluffy. Um, but you don't look like what you think you want to look like with more muscle on your body. That is true. And that is part of this process. And that is part of understanding the process. So if we go 3 weeks, see the scale go up I'll say 5 pounds. The scale goes up 5 pounds in 3 weeks, and we go, oh my God. And you look at yourself in the mirror and go, I don't like it. And then you go right into a mini cut and decrease your calories again and say, I need to cut this fat off, and then I can build more muscle. We are just defeating the purpose. We are in this endless cycle of never giving ourselves enough time to build a significant amount of muscle. So make sure that you commit to the process and that you understand what it is going to take. So let's talk about what our calories should actually look like. I've talked a lot about, we need to eat more, but how much more? So I think a lot of the old school mentality and the bro science and the dirty bulk mentality is just eat as much as possible. Get as many calories in from wherever. Processed foods allow you to eat more. You can eat burgers, eat ice cream at night. You're bulking. You want that energy. But I think this is slightly misguided and leads us to putting on more fat than we want to, and then leading to this endless cycle of freak out, not feeling great by eating more food, seeing the scale go up, seeing fat go up. So, where do we actually set our calories? So, I am going to give you a modest calorie surplus. Now, I actually believe that you can gain muscle at maintenance. It will just be at a slightly slower rate. So we need to start at our maintenance calories. So you're going to bump your calories up to maintenance if you're in a deficit, or if you have been maintaining for a while, you kind of know where this maintenance level is. How do we find maintenance? So you can use calorie estimators, but the best way to do it is just to track your calories, track your food, and track your weight on the scale. Do this for about 2-ish weeks. And if your weight doesn't fluctuate more than a pound or two either direction, over those 2, maybe 3 weeks, that's your maintenance calories. That is the easiest way to figure it out. So, those little weight fluctuations, please don't worry about those. They are too small to care about. Weight can fluctuate for a million different reasons, especially when it is just a couple of pounds. So let's say you're a 135-pound woman and the scale goes up 2 pounds. You barely gained a percent of your body. You gained a little over a percent of your body weight. That's nothing. Please don't freak out about that. That is maintenance. We will fluctuate up and down just a little bit, but if we're staying in about that, 2 pound range or so on average, then that is your maintenance diet. So you can actually gain muscle here. I'll talk a little bit about how I think you can do that as we continue to go through this and go over the other methods or the other things that we need to hit to make sure that we're bulking properly. But what we're going to do is from that maintenance, you're going to bump up to maybe a 5 to 10% calorie surplus. I don't really think that you need to go much higher than that. Now, you can go up to maybe about 15%. There was a recent study done. I posted about this on Instagram, but there was a recent study done. Now, it was a very small study and it was a very short study because of COVID. But what they found is they took 3 groups. One ate in a 15% surplus, one ate in a 5% surplus, and one ate at maintenance. They found no significant differences in muscle mass or strength gains outside of the bench press. Now, this one does make sense because the 15% group was the one who had the highest increase in bench press. They also had the highest increase in total body mass. Also makes sense. See, the calories don't lie, guys. I really, if you take nothing away from this podcast, is that calories do matter. If you want to gain or you want to lose, they matter. When they are controlled and protein is controlled with calories, if you're in a deficit, you lose weight. If you're in a surplus, you gain weight. If you're at maintenance, you stay basically the same. This is proven time and time again. It is the law of thermodynamics. So the calories do matter. So how many calories you consume in a surplus really does matter. So the 15% group gained more body mass. Now, when you have more body mass and you have a bigger chest, it is easier to bench press more weight. One, because you probably have a little bit more muscle mass in your chest, but also it's just a shorter range of motion to do the bench press. So it's harder to control for things like, a dumbbell press or something, but that would probably be a more apt test for this because bench press has that range of motion component to it. But anyway, point of the study is that they all gained about the same amount of muscle mass. And the 15% group gained significantly more, and that's statistical significance, significantly more body mass and they had an increase in skin fold measurement. So if you've ever seen them use like the calipers to measure body fat, that is a skin fold. So an increase in that is an increase in body fat. So they did see a significant increase from the 15% group to the 5% and the moderate group. So that's why it kind of leads me to believe that we don't need as high of a surplus. And if we can even gain muscle at maintenance, that is even better. So understanding that we don't need to jack our calories through the roof. This can allow us to eat a healthier diet, consume less processed foods, and just focus on eating a little bit more so that we can give our body that extra fuel that it needs. And if we're going to be pushing ourselves a little bit harder in the gym, maybe we need to give ourselves a little more fuel to combat that and be able to take advantage of the extra calories and the extra energy that we have. So we'll be training harder because we're giving ourselves more fuel. That is a recipe for success when it comes to building muscle. So even if it's a little bit of placebo of giving yourself that little bit of surplus so that you're able to push yourself a little bit harder in the gym and able to recover a little bit better from that, great, we'll take it. Anything that helps us train harder. So you can give yourself up to that 10% surplus if you can find a way to eat in that. Now, when we break it down as to what that looks like macro wise, and because this surplus is so much smaller than maybe conventional wisdom or the old school theory of how to bulk, that is another reason why we are going to increase the time frame so much longer, because we don't want to put on the body fat, but we're not giving ourselves all of the energy that we possibly could to be able to build muscle. We need to extend that time frame out just a little bit more. So more than the 12 to 16 weeks. Again, I want to push it to like 6 months. I'd love to see you do an 8-month bulk. I've been on basically like a 2-year bulk at somewhere around maintenance calories. Within that 2 years, I've taken maybe a few little cuts here and there just to kind of cut off some body fat for either the summer or just to feel a little bit better. Or just because I wanted to increase my cardio because I hadn't been doing enough, and it is important for your heart health and things like that. So that led me to losing a little bit of fat. But it's basically been 2 years of what I would consider a bulk. And it's benefited me a lot. And like I said, I've done it pretty much around maintenance, maybe a few, you know, periods in a surplus in a small cut, but it's been 2 years at this level. And I think it has really benefited me. I have more muscle mass on my body at the age of 32 than I ever have in my entire life. I am stronger now at the age of 32 than I've ever been in my entire life. And, I was a D3 athlete, but I was a college athlete, and I, was in the prime of my life in my early 20s. And, I'm in better shape and condition now than I was then, because I have been so intentional about this. So taking the time to be intentional will allow us to keep the calories lower. And because that surplus is not so high, we won't gain as much mass, but hopefully not as much fat either. Now, this is where the macros come into play as to what type of mass and tissue we are putting on. So when we are overeating or eating at maintenance, bringing our calories up, what happens to our macros? Do they change? Now, to understand this, if you are newer to this or newer to this process, we need to understand what our macros should be at that maintenance level. So we find our maintenance calories, and then we want to set our protein intake, because protein is so important for building and maintaining muscle, obviously, and all of the other tissue in your body. Also, it has plenty of metabolic benefits, thermic effect of food, building muscle will help increase your metabolism, on and on and on. Protein is important. Regardless of what you think, we have a minimum protein intake that we should be hitting. It should be about 0.7 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. Now, this can come from whatever your preferred protein sources are, and that range can fluctuate based on your goals, how much protein you can really eat, all these different kind of things. If you're at least getting 0.7 grams per pound of body weight, you are in a good spot. So when we bulk, does the protein number come up? We'll get there. But let's talk about the next macronutrient that we set in our calories. That one is going to be fat. Now, we want a minimum of 20% of our calories to come from fat. This number can go up to 40%, somewhere in that range, but minimum 20% for hormone health, vitamin and nutrient absorption, and just general health. Omega 3s, omega 6s, they're very important for your body, your brain. We need fat. We can't produce it from our body. We can't produce essential fat from our body itself. We have to eat it. So we have a minimum threshold for fat. Now, if you're thinking about eating at maintenance, you can probably eat a little bit more fat. Remember, fat has 9 calories per gram, so it is going to take up more of our calorie budget. So as we increase that percentage of our calories, that is more and more actual calories coming from fat. So if you're in a cut, we want to cut that fat down to around that minimum level. But as we bulk a little bit, we can bump that number up. But remember, fat is only stored as fat. So if we are overeating in fat, it will be stored as fat. So when people are in, ketosis or on low carb diets, whatever it might be, yes, they are burning more fat because they aren't giving themselves carbohydrates. They don't have as much glycogen to actually use. They have to use the fat. But when you reintroduce and you reconsume that fat, they also store more fat. So keep that in mind when we're talking about how we're going to break out our macros in this calorie surplus for our bulk. And then the rest of your calories can kind of come from the carbohydrates. So however that fits into your diet, make sure you're getting enough fiber, yada, 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 so on and so on. If you're a serious endurance athlete, you want maybe, I think 4 to 6 grams per kilogram of body weight for carbohydrates. For your average person or your average, fitness enthusiast, we'll call you, 3 to 4 grams per kilogram of body weight. You could probably get away with a little bit less. I don't think carbs are as important as people make them out to be for just general performance. Like getting into the gym, doing a strength training session, being pretty strong, building significant muscle. I'm not going to say, you can do that without consuming a ton of carbohydrates. Now, we do need to consume carbohydrates. If you want to build a decent physique and you want to be generally pretty strong in the gym, yes, you do need to consume carbohydrates, but we don't need to be eating fucking Skittles in the middle of our workout, or Starburst, or whatever people eat in the gym, whatever bodybuilders. I mean, granted, a bodybuilder on like a marathon leg day session, maybe you're using more glycogen, but for your general strength workout, you're not going to deplete your glycogen fast enough if you're eating, a normal amount of carbohydrate in this kind of range that I kind of laid out for you. It's plenty. You don't need to worry too much about how much you consume beforehand. As long as you consume enough in a 24-hour period, you should have plenty. Unless you are a serious endurance athlete, a serious CrossFit athlete, or a bodybuilder on a marathon leg day session, like a 3-hour leg day, whatever it might be. Anyway, I digress. So when we go into this surplus, or when we increase our calories, where do we want these calories to come from? The main source for me is going to be carbohydrates. So with increasing your energy intake, I don't actually think protein is quite as important as carbohydrate will be for your increased energy intake. Let me explain why. Because you are giving your body more energy, it is going to be less likely to break down amino acids and break down muscle for energy purposes. So, we probably don't need quite as much protein as we would actually in a cut because we have less energy coming in. Our body is using energy that is stored on us. We want to keep that protein coming in so that we keep ahead of the muscle breakdown process. Protein absorption and protein breakdown are happening constantly throughout the day. That is why we want to keep that protein as high as possible so we can try to stay ahead of the protein breakdown and the muscle breakdown as much as possible. As we provide our body more energy, it might not be as beneficial to just continue to jack up protein. Now, with that being said, there is no upper limit to protein. And if we are going to do my next point of this bulk and we are going to train harder, protein breakdown might increase. So you may be able to bump your protein up a little bit. But again, we're going all the way up to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. If you're a 200-pound dude, that's shoot, what's 2%? It's 250 grams of protein. I don't know how much benefit you're going to get from eating 300 grams of protein as opposed to 200. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here is how much protein do we really need? I think I did that math wrong. Anyway, doesn't matter. It's somewhere close to that. But are you going to get that much benefit from bumping your protein up, another 50 grams on top of that? I don't know. I don't believe it's that important. So, when we set this calorie surplus, say we jump our calories up 10%, just for math's sake, we're going to do 2,000 calorie maintenance. So we're going to bump it up to 2,200. Those 200 calories should come mostly from carbohydrates. Let me explain to you why. Again, with that increase in energy, we're going to want to increase output in the gym to maximize that energy that we're giving our body. So the carbohydrates will play a role there. Again, not super important, like I said, but if you're going from less volume or less intensity to more, it will be more glycogen demanding. So you want that. As we build more muscle, carbohydrates store as glycogen in the body. Where does glycogen store? It stores in muscle. So we want that energy in the muscle to be able to use, and it will make the muscle look fuller. Instead of just storing fat in there, we will store glycogen, which will make the muscles appear fuller and appear bigger. So we're placing a higher energy demand on our body, and we want to overeat in those carbohydrates so that it stores in as glycogen to support that higher demand, but also because it will not be stored as fat. It will actually be stored in the muscle, giving us a fuller muscle look. So if we overeat in fat, while that can be used for energy and can be turned into energy, that is going to just store probably as fat, especially if we're in a surplus. And if you're in that surplus, the 20%, 25, 30% of calories that you're getting from fat, you will get more out of it already, which is great. It's good for hormones, recovery, etc., etc. But if we try to just increase fat, that is only going to take up a higher percentage again of those calories. Now, if you're having trouble eating in that surplus, then maybe that's where eating higher fat foods or, just fattier cuts of meat, switch from your chicken breast to chicken thighs or, your sirloin to a ribeye. Give yourself those extra calories to enjoy those fattier cuts of meat that we don't get to have. That can be an easy way to bump up into that surplus, but we should be focused on how do we increase protein, maybe a little bit, maybe slightly, especially if we're on the lower end of that range. Let's maybe try to bump it up to make sure that we're building muscle, because the process of breaking down amino acids into glycogen through gluconeogenesis is not something that the body wants to do, especially when you are placing a higher training demand on your body and you're increasing protein breakdown. It's gonna want to use those amino acids for the muscles and to build the muscles. So just increasing your protein intake is not going to increase fat storage, probably not. So if you're going to overeat in anything, I usually recommend it being protein, especially because, again, it's storing as muscle, has the highest thermic effect of food, will keep your metabolism a little bit higher so that you can keep some body fat off. But it might be hard to overeat in protein just because it is a little bit more satiating. And I think that comes from the fact that, lean protein sources are harder to eat. Like eating a whole chicken breast is harder than eating a ribeye, just because it is plain. You have to chew it a lot. Those kind of things. It could be a little drier. Leaner cuts of meat aren't usually quite as tasty because fat equals flavor. If you ever watched a cooking show. But focusing on how do I get a little bit more protein in, mostly I'm going to bump my calories up from carbohydrates for my bulk in this 10, maybe 15% surplus if you are someone who is a very hard gainer. If it is really difficult for you to gain weight, then definitely you can bump this up. I think that's where probably another mistake kind of comes in is, dudes that are, and women, I'll put you both in here, that are generally very, very skinny. It's very hard for them to gain weight. And this is usually a genetic component that comes from your NEAT, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is something that, while the fitness industry tells you that you can control it by, increasing your steps will increase your NEAT, you're doing that on purpose. You don't control your NEAT. Your NEAT is subconscious movement. If you're watching this video on YouTube, you see me talking with my hands, that is NEAT. Now, as you eat more food, your NEAT increases. You will tend to fidget more. You will move around more. You will be more restless. Other people who are easier gainers gain more weight. That doesn't happen to them when they provide their body more energy. Their NEAT just basically stays the same, or only goes up a little bit, which is not enough to compensate for overeating, blah, blah, blah. But you will need to overeat if you are this typically very skinny person who wants to build muscle. And this is even a more important process for you to be very intentional about it. And the last thing I will say is, I know I talked about not dirty bulking, right? Not just eating whatever you want, a ton of processed stuff, a ton of fast food, but don't be afraid to include some of that stuff in your diet if you want to bulk for a long period of time and you need to increase your calories, especially if you are one of these hard gainers, or if you're in a big surplus, like 15, maybe you go up to 20%. Don't be afraid to eat some processed foods. Make sure you hit all of your big rocks. I need to hit my protein intake. I need to make sure that my fiber is on point, that I'm eating enough nutrient dense foods, that I'm getting enough quality fat. But once I've done all those things, then we have a little bit more freedom, and we do want to give our body more calories. So we can bump that up, and it is easier to consume processed foods, things like cereal. It's easier to overeat in cereal, or maybe it's some sort of ice cream. Hopefully it's a little bit healthier than just eating, regular ice cream, but you can still consume more of it. Or, like I said, if you have the calories there, consume it. But just focusing on hitting your macros in whatever form that looks like for you. And don't be afraid to include some of these processed foods as long as those big rocks are hit. We need the energy. It can be hard to get. It can be exhausting to eat a lot of food. For somebody like me, my maintenance calories is probably between 3,000 and 3,400. It's somewhere in that range. I don't really track my calories as much anymore, but that's about how much I eat on a daily basis. and I eat basically the same thing every day. That's how I know, and my weight stays about the same. That's how I know I'm at maintenance. But that's about where my calories are. So if I really wanted to go into a surplus from there, whether it was 10% and I'm up to somewhere around, 3,800 calories, that's going to be a lot of food to eat over and over and over and over again, especially if I'm trying to do it from just whole foods. I need to get some things that are easy to consume, that are a little bit more enjoyable, so that I'm able to get those calories in. We'll see if that ever actually happens. If I ever go into another, real bulk, if I really go for it. But right now, we're staying at maintenance. But don't be afraid of those. So, to wrap up, calories, don't bump them up too high. Actually, try to stay around maintenance. Maybe go to a 5 to 10% surplus and see how that treats you before we decide if that's not enough, that we need to go a little bit higher. Maybe bump the protein up a little bit. Focus more on increasing your calories from carbohydrates. They store as glycogen, giving us more energy and making the muscles look fuller. It stores in the muscle. Keep the fat right about where it is. If we overeat in fat, we will just store more fat. So don't be afraid of it, but just understand that that is part of the process. And then don't be afraid to just get some of those processed foods in. Now, with all of that calorie stuff in, what about our training? Because we are going into this bulk, we are giving ourselves more energy. What do we need to do with our training? And I'm going to break this down to 2 words: train harder. Train hard. That's the biggest thing. I want you to really push yourself, not push yourself. We don't want to do that. We want to push ourselves. But intensity is the driver of mechanical tension, which is the driver of muscle growth. So if we increase the intensity, we will increase tension on the muscle, which will be the stimulus for growth. Without this stimulus for growth, without the training stimulus, there is no growth. We can eat all the food in the world. Sure, you might put on this much more muscle. You can't see me. My fingers are just close enough together to be able to see. But you're not going to gain the muscle that you want without that stimulus for growth. You have to challenge the muscle, place tension on the muscle for it to adapt and signal to the body that it needs to grow. So, train hard. If you think you're training hard, train harder. Start to track your progress and train harder in the gym. So we're going to push that intensity higher than we have before. So when we think about intensity, as I've stated a bunch of times on this podcast, but I will go over again, there are 2 ways that we can gauge intensity. It is with RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, or RIR, which are reps in reserve. RPE is a scale from 0 to 10. RIR is a scale from 10 to 0. It's just the opposite, the inverse of each other. So rate of perceived exertion, 0 or 1 being sitting on your couch watching Netflix, 10 being the hardest thing you've ever done in your entire life, thought you might shit your pants on a squat. RIR, again, just the inverse of that. How many reps did you have left? 0 being absolute failure. I could not do another. And, it goes, I guess, infinitely in the other direction of when you start the set, how many reps do you have left? So for muscle growth purposes, we want to make sure that for our working sets, we are at a minimum of 8 to 9 RPE or 2 to 1 RIR. We used to think it was probably 3 or 4, but I'd like to see that pushed a little bit higher, because it is mentally very difficult to push yourself to failure. I think pushing yourself to a 2 to a 1 actually probably gets you closer to failure than 3 to 4, just because mentally we are going to stop ourselves earlier than our body will actually go. We can typically go longer, and it takes a long time to continue to advance enough in your training to understand truly what your failure point is on different lifts. And I think this is one of the reasons I believe that it is very possible to recomp or build muscle at maintenance as we advance in our training, because you continue to adapt and grow and be able to push the intensity higher. So if we find that next level, like, ooh, I found my new level of intensity that I can push to. I've been feeding my body at maintenance, giving it enough energy. I get my recovery on point. Now my training intensity jumps. You can make gains in your fitness and your muscle just by doing that. So even if you're an intermediate to maybe advanced lifter, these kind of tactics can actually help you, I think, build muscle and gain a new level of stimulus that you haven't achieved just by increasing some of these variables that I'm talking about in this training portion. So increase that intensity. Make sure that you're tracking your progress and track the intensity with the progress. So if you're doing an exercise for 3 sets of 8, make sure that those 3 sets of 8, those working sets, are at that 8 to 9 RPE or 0, 2, or 1 RIR. And maybe the last set of the exercise or the last, exercise of your session, everything is pushed to failure. Or more isolation exercises that are easier to recover from, push them to failure. You're doing arms, you're doing lateral raises, you're doing calves, leg extensions, leg curls. Push those to failure, complete failure, where you literally cannot do another rep. I'm going to talk about length and partials in a second. Add those in there too. But make sure that that intensity is there. Track the weight you're doing at that rep and the intensity. If the intensity was not high enough, bump up the weight or bump up the reps. Either way, you will build muscle by placing that tension on there. And then the next one is going to be volume. So we need to hit enough volume to be able to grow. It's generally recommended that anywhere from 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week is the acceptable range for muscle growth. But there might not be an upper limit to this. So, especially if you're giving your body more calories, I would say making sure that you hit every muscle group for at least 10 to 12 sets a week, those working sets. When I say sets, I'm talking working sets at that intensity that we talked about. So, making sure that you're getting enough volume at the intensity that you want. Now, rep range, I don't really care. I really don't. And you shouldn't either. But basically, for the rep ranges for muscle growth, I recommend usually 6 to 12 reps because it is easier to gauge RIR and RPE on those lower sets. It's easier to gauge your failure point with lower reps. So if you can even keep it in the 6 to 8, 10 rep range, 12 maybe gets a little iffy depending on the exercise, but I think that's usually a safe bet. Now, if you can build muscle at low rep ranges, but again, when we're pushing those low rep ranges to that intensity, the load has to jump a ton. And that is very taxing. That is hard to recover from. So, unless you're very strength focused in your bulk, don't really worry. I don't think about going super low and that heavy just to make sure that we can recover. But yeah, when you're pushing that intensity at those types of volumes, you want to make sure that the load is not super taxing and choosing exercises that are not super taxing on the entire body. Trying to do all of your quad volume on barbell back squats is going to be very taxing. So making sure that you break up the exercises so that you can get the volume for the muscle groups that you want to grow and be able to recover. Now you're giving it body extra energy in a bulk, so you should be able to handle a little bit more. Now, for those muscle groups that you really want to grow. Like, say you really want to grow your back, we can jack that volume up significantly. This is something that I did recently, a few years ago, actually. I decided to just take 6 months and grow my back. And I did back twice a week, basically nothing on my upper body but my back, and it grew. But to say that is, we don't know if there is an upper limit of volume that we can't continue to grow. There was a study by Ennis and colleagues where they worked up, they all started at 22 sets. One group stayed at 22. One group increased a little bit each week up to 42, and one group increased up to 52. Now, the differences were not humongous from 42 to 52, but they did see muscle gains at 52 sets per week for, I think, the quads. But obviously, making sure that you can fit that into your schedule, that you're able to recover from that, that you're able to get enough volume for the rest of your body while recovering, on and on and on, and that you have enough time in the week to do that many sets. But you can increase the sets specifically on the muscles that you want to grow significantly if any of them are lagging or anything like that. You can continue to increase them above 20, provided that you can recover and that you have the time to do it. Because again, you're giving your body more energy. So just thinking about how to break up your week, how many times a week do I need to hit each body part that I want to grow to get enough volume? All of that going to be very important. Be very intentional about that. The next one is obviously length. More and more continues to come out about the lengthened position specifically for muscle growth. And this is another area that I think as you continue to train and get better and better at training and improve your mobility from training, that you can find more length. I think this is part of what helped me grow my back, is I finally unlocked this thing in my head where I was able to get more extension in my back and be able to stretch my lats and round my back over to really stretch it out and get full extension on, lat pull downs and things like that. Really understanding that, I think, has helped me find growth even without going into huge surpluses. So that's another advancement in your training because it increases the tension on the muscle. All muscles do is contract. That's the only thing that they do. So obviously, when you're contracting a muscle, it is contracting to be able to produce that force to move the weight. But as you are stretching out, all that muscle is trying to do is hold on to that contraction. So as you continue to stretch it, you're just placing tension on it because it is trying its hardest to hold on to that. And I believe that is why, because you are almost, I don't want to say ripping the muscle apart because that's just not the case, but it sort of is. I'm not going to go into the muscle contractions, how it actually works, because I don't want to get anything wrong. There's a bunch of terms that I don't remember off the top of my head, and I just don't want to get it wrong. But basically, there's these two things called myosin and actin. And what happens is when your muscle goes to contract, the myosin or the actin grab the other and pull it all together. So think about when you flex your bicep and it comes up. It gets higher. That's because the muscle fibers are overlapping over each other because these things are pulling themselves together. So the muscle fibers are overlapping over each other and stacking that muscle up. So that's what's happening when it's contracting. So now it's all stacked on top of each other. And as you lengthen it out, it has to spread back out. And it's trying its hardest not to do that. That is tension. So that is why I believe the lengthened position of the lift is the most important for muscle growth. And that's why it provides so much tension. That's also why it leaves you more sore. If you've ever done, more eccentric focused training, you typically find yourself feeling a little bit more sore afterwards than if you just did shortened range of motion, less eccentric, more concentric focus, faster eccentrics, things like that. So that is why I think that is a huge piece. So, adjusting your exercises to find more length, especially in the muscles that you want to grow, I think is very, very important for us when we're bulking to think about in our training. Even if you want to keep, your big lifts in there, you're a strength person who likes to squat, bench, deadlift, things like that. Put some accessory work in there that helps you get more length. It'll be easier to recover from, on and on and on. So that is how we adjust our training. But the biggest thing that it always comes back to is train hard. Push that intensity. If you really want to grow muscle, continue to push the intensity. I cannot stress this enough. I'm going to come back to you, ladies. You especially, if you want to be toned, lift hard, lift harder, push. I keep saying that. Wow, can't talk today. Push yourself in the gym. Track your intensity. Be objective and honest with yourself as to how hard you're really going. If you want to get the body that you truly want, it is going to take gaining muscle, and part of gaining muscle is training harder. So go ahead, get in there. Don't be afraid to lift heavy. Push yourself. Goes for you too, guys. Actually push yourself. Stop going in and doing the same shit every single time. Stop benching the same weight for the same reps every time you go in the gym and wondering why you don't have a bigger chest. Done with it. And I already touched on it, but make sure that you're tracking your progress in the gym. This is a huge piece of it, not just for the intensity part, but this is a good indicator that we're actually gaining muscle. So we're tracking our progress in the gym. We're tracking the weight, the reps, the intensity, all of these things. So if we are able to lift more weight at the same amount of reps and the same intensity, then we are getting stronger. If we're able to do the same weight for more reps at the same intensity, then we are getting stronger. If we are doing this and seeing ourselves get stronger, then it is a good indication that if the scale is going up, that we are putting on muscle. So this is a great way to not freak out about seeing the scale go up or seeing yourself with a little bit more body fat. If you're like, okay, I'm setting out to do this bulk, I'm setting out to gain muscle. How am I going to know for sure that I'm gaining muscle? If we are gaining strength, it is a pretty good indicator that as we're gaining weight, that we are gaining muscle. Again, it will come with some fat. That's okay. We'll be able to take that off later. But this can really help you understand, because body measurements might not necessarily be a great indicator, because as you eat in a surplus, you're going to gain body mass. How do we know what that mass is? The best indicator that we have is performance in the gym, because like I told you before, strength has a few different components. There's the motor skill component, the neurological component, and the force production, which is the muscle mass component. So if we're doing a similar type of program. This is also why, if we set out on this bulk, we should commit to a program for an extended period of time. We want to get very good at the exercises that we're doing so that we can make progress and know that we're making progress. So if we try to switch up our exercises constantly, we're not going to be able to track this progress properly. We're not going to give ourselves time to get very good at an exercise, to be able to push the intensity, get to significantly heavy loads, increase reps, because we're just going to keep spinning our wheels and we're not going to develop the movement patterns necessary to execute the exercises that we need to. Even getting length on an exercise, it takes some practice. It takes some feeling out how to lengthen this muscle. How does it feel? building that mind muscle connection. So commit to the program and track your progress. This can be a great way to understand that you are gaining muscle in the process of your bulk if you're seeing your weight go up. Knowing that your macros are on point, tracking your progress in the gym, two great ways to know if the weight you're actually gaining is muscle so that we don't freak out and go into a mini cut. What is a mini cut? This is usually a 2 to 3 week, reduction in calories to cut off some body fat to kind of see where you're at. Now, I mentioned earlier that I don't love this process because I think the biggest problem is we do it too quickly. We don't give our bodies the time to adapt to the exercises, get more energy, push the intensity, make progress, and actually build muscle. This process takes a significant amount of time, especially as we continue to train. So I think, like I said, a lot of people see it. They go 3 to 4 weeks. They go one block, training block, and go, okay, now I need to go into a cut. So you've done 4 weeks. You made a little progress, but then you cut for 2 weeks. And now it's like, okay, we stopped this muscle gain process, maybe even lost some muscle because we're trying to cut down quickly or whatever it might be. When you lose body weight, just like when you add body weight, you add muscle and fat. Whenever you lose body weight, you lose muscle and fat. We can mitigate some of this with training and protein intake, but it does not stop all of it. Approximately 20 to 25% of the weight that you lose is going to be muscle. So if every month we gain 5 pounds in a training block, and then we go 2 weeks and we lose 5 pounds, how are we figuring this out? How are we determining exactly how much muscle is being gained? How can we guarantee that we continue to build muscle without setting ourselves back at a lower bar? So I think the mini cuts are fine. Again, like I said, I've been at a bulk / maintenance for like 2 years. And I've taken a few mini cuts in there for, the purposes of just looking better, feeling better, eating less food because, I'm getting, in my head about eating more and more food, or I'm eating too much and I just don't feel great. Whatever the case might be, I've taken some mini cuts in there, but they come like every 4 to 6 months at this point now. And I don't do it constantly. It's every once in a while to bring my body weight back down. Like I compete at powerlifting at 198 pounds. I'm probably too small for that, but anyway, beside the point, we're going to keep competing there because 181 is a long way from 198. But anyway, so I compete there, but I don't like to stay there all the time. When I train for powerlifting, I get a little bit heavier than 198 for, my peak training. Meet comes, I cut down to 198. I get there after the meet. I like to drop down to under 195, around 193. That's where I like to hang out for the most part. So I'll hang out around there, keep maintenance in there somewhere, probably around 195 is usually pretty good for me to be able to maintain pretty comfortably. And then I'll take a mini cut here and there if I need to, because I have a trip or, the summer's coming up, whatever it might be, as long as I don't have a meet in there. But other than that, I'm pretty much trying to stay around that and training hard, doing all these kind of things. And I'll take some intentional time to bulk. When it comes time to get closer to a meet, I start to bulk back up. I do it slowly and sustainably so that I'm not just putting on a bunch of body fat, because my goal is to have as much muscle as possible at 198 pounds. So if I continue to drop down, bulk my way back up, then I cut back down, then I bulk my way back up, continuously doing this sustainably over time, staying at a maintenance level that I know I can gain muscle, allows me to maintain and build as much muscle as I possibly can, which is the goal for me being a strength athlete. But if you just want to take the time to build your muscle mass, and build up your muscle mass so that you can be as healthy as possible, look as good as possible. Take the time to intentionally bulk and do it properly and sustainably so that we aren't just putting on a bunch of fat. We are able to commit to the process because the calories aren't overwhelming. The rate of weight gain is not overwhelming. The rate of body fat gain is not overwhelming mentally, emotionally. Don't forget about these things when they come to being able to bulk. Also, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but groceries are expensive. So if you really want to bulk and eat a bunch of food, sure, you can eat a bunch of processed bullshit, but you'll feel like shit. But if you want to eat a healthy diet and be able to gain muscle, a smaller deficit is just fine. Closer to maintenance will be just fine. You just have to extend that period and truly commit to it. And like I said, I addressed you guys directly, but I want to really dedicate this podcast to the ladies out there because I truly think that this is for you more than anybody. Guys want to put on muscle. The things I gave to you out there for the guys is how to do this properly. You want to do this. We love to eat. Nobody talks shit on dudes for, I mean, guys joke around about guys being fat, but it's not the way women are treated. Unfortunately, I'm very sorry for that unfortunate stereotype and the way that overweight women are perceived. It's fucked up. It's stupid. It's bullshit. And I hate it. I want everyone to have the opportunity to be strong, feel great, and look the way that they want to. I think that is done through building muscle. And the reason that I want this to go out there to the ladies so much is that the bulking process is for you too. You do not have to live in a calorie deficit. If you want a bigger butt, if you want bigger shoulders, a bigger back, we need to build muscle and you need to be intentional about it. And I want you to be intentional about it, unapologetically intentional about it. Do it, please. It will make you feel great. You will be strong. You will have more muscle. You will have the look that you want. You will have the confidence. You can help yourself around food with not constantly depriving yourself, constantly being in a calorie deficit. And that goes for everybody. Spending time at maintenance and in a slight surplus feels great mentally and emotionally, recovery wise, physically. Give yourself some time to do that. Enjoy yourself. But if we do it properly, we can make sure that we're gaining more muscle than we are fat in that process. So let's hit on all of these things. Just to recap everything that we talked about today. If you want to bulk properly, set yourself a long enough timeline. I would love to see you do a minimum of 6 months, but I'll set the minimum at 4. If you can go longer, because the longer that you go, the less calories that we have to consume. And we don't want to over consume calories to the point where it's difficult to eat or we're putting on too much body fat. So the longer we can extend that period out, the better for our health and the better for our mental and emotional space as well. Get comfortable with the fact that you're going to gain weight, the scale is going to go up, and body fat will increase, and that your calories will increase. We've been so conditioned to eat in a calorie deficit, lose weight. You have to lose weight. You have to lose weight. This is how you do it. This is how you do it. We need to build muscle too, and we need to be intentional about that process. But get comfortable with it. This process is going to take time. We are committing to a bigger timeline. So get comfortable with the fact that you'll put on a little bit of body fat, that you will see the scale go up, that your macro tracker will tell you that you're eating more food. It's okay. And if you tell people that you're going to eat more food, it's going to be okay as well. So get comfortable with that fact. This is just a part of the process. Just trust it and commit to it. Don't freak out when you see the scale go up. When you see a little bit of extra body fat on your body, it is part of the process. If we go in small bursts of bulking, freak out about what we see, whether it's the number or in the mirror, and then we go into a mini cut, we just kind of stalled our progress. We want to take the time, commit to the process. So, calorie surplus, 5, 10, maybe a little bit higher if we really need to, but to start out, let's go maintenance 5 or 10% surplus. See how our body reacts in the first month or two. If it's not growing the way that we want, we can bump up from there. We can always go up, but we don't want to have to, come back down or accidentally gain too much body fat. We want to make sure that we mitigate the body fat. So about that, protein between 0.7 grams and 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. We can bump that up a little bit if we have the calories and it's easy enough for us to consume the protein. Fat, somewhere probably around 25 to 30% of calories. It can bump up all the way to 40, but we don't want to overeat fat because that will store as fat. If we're going to overeat in anything, let's overeat in carbohydrates. Increase the muscle glycogen to increase our energy and performance in the gym and our recovery. Also, glycogen storing in the muscle makes the muscle look more full, and it is not fat. So that helps us mitigate that fat gain as well if we increase the glycogen that we store on the body. Let's train harder, increase the intensity, increase the volume where possible and where applicable, and then find ways to get more length. Switch up your exercise selection to get more length. Also, with more volume and more intensity, switch up your exercise selection so that the exercises are easier to recover from. More isolated exercises will be better. More stable exercises that don't stress the spine quite as much and don't require as much stability will be easier to push to that intensity, get more length, and recover from the volume. So just some things to think about. You can still include a lot of barbell lifts, don't worry, but just the accessory movements. Let's bring that recoverability up by, decreasing the stability or increasing the isolation, whatever it might be. But that's a great way to do it. Lastly, with training harder, make sure that we are committing to a program and tracking our progress in the gym. If we are getting stronger or able to do more volume at the same intensity with the same weight, we are getting stronger in the gym, the weight on the scale is going up, good indication that it is muscle. And by committing to a program, we're able to get good at the lifts, be able to push the intensity a little more, and make sure that we are tracking and making progress. If we keep switching things up, it's really hard to tell if you're making progress, and then you're just confused that is the weight I'm gaining the right weight or not. So make sure that you're tracking your progress in the gym and, again, committing to that program and sticking to it for an extended period of time. When we're bulking, I'd recommend finding the exercises that really work best for you, that allow you to push the intensity, do the volume that you can recover from, and get length, and really dive into those. So those should be the core of your program. Kind of switch out some accessory work, every 4, 6, 8 weeks, just to keep it interesting and switch it up. But those exercises that really work for you, dive in and make the progress on them during your bulk. They should be the staples of your program. And then everything else we can have a little bit more fun with and keep things interesting, but commit to that process. And that is the last thing I will leave you guys with. If you want to bulk, and you should want to bulk, you should want to build and maximize your muscle while you can. Commit, 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 and be intentional about it. It is just as important and just as thoughtful and intentional as losing fat. Fitness industry talks to you all the time. How to lose fat, how to do it while maintaining muscle. But we don't give you enough guidance about how to. The guidance on bulking is just as dumb as the general advice on weight loss. So people say, eat less, move more. Great. And for bulking, it's just eat more, lift harder, which I told you to lift harder, but kind of gave you some other stuff to do too. That's part of it. Just like eating less and moving more is part of losing weight, but that doesn't tell me how to gain muscle, or like why I should gain muscle, or what do I actually eat to make sure I'm gaining muscle. Just like, what do I actually eat to make sure I'm losing fat and not losing muscle? It's the same both ways. We need to be as intentional about both things. And there are seasons of life, there are seasons of the year where we need to focus and be intentional on both of them. So take it as seriously as you would your fat loss plan, as you would your general health plan. Bulking is part of being a healthy person and the athlete that you want to be. If you're a power lifter, you're a strength athlete, again, there's going to come a certain point in time where the only way to get stronger is to get bigger. And you want to get bigger in muscle so you can produce more force. So this comes back. This is for everybody. This is for you ladies. This is for older folks. This is for everybody. Bulking is for everybody. Take it seriously, commit to it, and let me know if you need any help with your bulk. I am very passionate about helping people build muscle and being intentional and smart about it and doing it correctly and doing it the way that will help you be as healthy as possible while you're gaining weight. Like telling someone I want you to gain weight can be terrifying, but we're going to do it the right way. So if you want to bulk, hit me up. Leave a review on this podcast. Hit me up at CoachQ_fitness on Instagram. Send me a DM, comment on one of my posts that you need help, that you want help with bulking. I am here to help you, here to help you understand it and explain it. And if you liked this podcast about bulking, please like, rate, subscribe, anywhere you get the podcast, and leave me that review so that I know what I can do for you. And if you have any questions, send me those DMs on Instagram, leave them in the reviews on the podcast, and I will answer them on the podcast. This is the Lifting Cues podcast, and I want to give you all of the cues and answer your questions here on the podcast. This is the podcast for lifters, and it is for you. And until next week, happy bulking, guys.